The Maral of Prague, he has a commentary on Pirkei Avos. Literally, Pirkei Avos means the chapter of our fathers, meaning of not the patriarchs, meaning the equivalent of those who we have to call, who transmit the values and the beliefs which are fundamental to a Jew's life and his function and his behavior. In the Maral, he chose the title for his work on Pirkei Avos, Derech Chaim. Derech Chaim, the way of life. Why did he choose this title? Because there's a verse in Mishlei, in Proverbs, where Shlomo Melech states, Ki ner mitzvah v'torah or. The ner, the candle, is the mitzvah, but the Torah is the illumination, is the light, which will explain this. Then he continues, the derech chaim, and the way of life, tochochos musa. It's to be informed about various understandings, how to constrain yourself, not to veer off. Musa means that you should be able to understandings of life that allow you to walk that straight and narrow path and not to be overwhelmed and driven by our animalistic drives. So before we go and explain the verse, the way the Maral explains it, he explains something interesting. A human being of all living species is endowed with intelligence. Every living species other than human being, its functions based on its DNA, and the DNA determines its instinct. And that's why each species behaves differently and evolves and develops differently than any other species. Each species has its natural behavior pattern. The lion, the tiger, the domesticated, the undomesticated. Each one, because of its DNA, the way God created it, instinctively, it behaves differently than the other. The habitat is another different habitat. The human being is at another level. The human being was endowed with intelligence. What is intelligence? Intelligence means that to the degree that a person is able to apply himself, it doesn't come natural. It's only through our experiences of life and evaluations do we know how to navigate the field. We know how to navigate the turf. We have the ability, we have retention, we have analysis. There are many aspects to our intelligence, and based on all of them in combination, we're able to guide ourselves through life. But the natural intelligence, which is endowed to the human being, has tremendous limitation. Why? Because its guidance and its innate ability only directs us within the context of a human being, within the physical world, physicality. To be able to outside, to transcend our physicality, regardless of the genius of the mind and the potential, it cannot. You have to be taught. And the teachings, which Shlomo Melech is speaking about, King Solomon, the wise man who ever lived, these teachings are considered outside the natural realm. And this can only be communicated to us by God himself, because the Jew himself is not a physical being. In terms of our physical characteristics, our physicality, we are physical. But the innate value of a Jew is development of his spirituality, which is his soul. Ner mitzvah. What is a ner? Ner is a candle. So he goes to explain something interesting. When you have a candle, it's a receptacle. You have oil, you have a wick. Now you ignite the wick. The light only burns as long as you have the fuel and you have the wick. And you have the vessel containing the fuel and the wick. But there's an attachment between the light and the physical material of that candle, of that receptacle. So that light itself is connected to the physical. When we speak about Torah's or, that's light which is unrelated to our physicality. Meaning, you put on tefillin. To do that, you must be involved in a physical act. You wear tzitzis, fringes on a four-cornered garment. You have to have the physicality of the garment, and you must wear it on your body. It's all related to the physical. You eat matzah. It's made of certain species of grain. It's made a specific way. You must chew it, swallow it. That's called eating. The Paschal lamb. Again, this is a mitzvah, but that directly can only be brought about through our physicality. Anything which is related to our physicality has limitation. Something which is our intellect is unlimited. God endows the Jew with the ability to process something which is called Torah. Torah is the illuminator. It's absolute light, unrelated to physical. We find that at the beginning of creation, God said on the first day of creation, let there be light. What was that light? What was the source of that light? It can't be the luminaries, the sun, the stars, because they were first created on the fourth day of creation. So what was this light? This light was light which emanated directly from God. It was not connected to the physicality of the world. What did God do with that light? Once the luminaries were created, it says before man was created, he hid it away for the devoutly righteous at the end of time, that only they are able to benefit from that light. That light is a holy light. That light is not connected to anything physical. That light directly emanates from God himself. The Torah itself, which is illuminator, that's an endowment of God, which is unrelated to the physical. The mind, the intellect, it's unrelated to physical. Of course, even a person when he's not alive, he's not able, the brain doesn't work. But the basis for the intellect is the soul of the person. That's why human being is not just an instinctive being, but an intellectual being, because that's rooted in our soul. It's not our physicality. Any other thing other than the study of Torah is directly related to our physicality, which has limitation, which is finite. The mitzvah is finite. The Torah is not finite. It's infinite. Because it's not rooted in our physicality, which every other mitzvah action is rooted in our physicality. So ner mitzvah, the mitzvah is the equivalent of the receptacle with the oil and the wick, and the flame being fueled by the oil and the wick. That light is what has limitation, because it's dependent upon the fuel and the wick that fuels it. Torah is not dependent on anything. That's independent light. Therefore, it's Torah or. Torah provides light, which is infinite light. The ultimate illuminator is Torah. Now, it's interesting. We find that every act which is sinful has to do with our physicality. That's within the realm of the physical. We say, God created the evil inclination, and he created the Torah as its antidote. Why is the Torah the antidote to the evil inclination? It's the study of Torah. It's not doing mitzvahs. Doing the mitzvah is not the antidote to the evil inclination. What is the evil inclination, and what is he rooted? He's rooted in our physicality. That's where he's rooted. As a result of that, the mitzvah itself being related to the body, where the body itself is tainted with the evil inclination, it's not outside of the body. It is the body. Therefore, it cannot control or incapacitate the evil inclination because it's connected to the body. But when you study Torah, Torah is unrelated to the body. That's infinite light. It's something which transcends the body. As a result of that, that illumination, which is unrelated to anything which is physical, is able to shed a light and bring a level of clarification and internalization that the evil inclination becomes totally incapacitated. Therefore, the Torah study itself is an antidote to the evil inclination for that reason. I always mention the Chaim HaKadosh writes, when the Talmud tells us in a number of locations, I've created the evil inclination, I've created the Torah as its antidote. That's only once one studies Torah lishma, for the sake of the Torah itself. If you study Torah with an ulterior motive, then the Torah will not be the antidote for the evil inclination. The question is why? If a person studies Torah purely for the sake of God, that's unrelated to the person. So exactly as the Torah itself is or, is light, it's not dependent on anything physical. It emanates from the soul, so it doesn't share any characteristic with the body itself, with the physicality of the world. But if a person, let's say, studies Torah because he wants acknowledgement, he wants recognition, for that sake, but that need for recognition, which is ego-driven, that's physical. That means that Torah is dependent, is somehow connected with the physicality of the person. Once that happens, that Torah cannot incapacitate. That cannot be the antidote for the evil inclination. It's only Torah which is unrelated to our physicality, purely for the sake of God's glory, for the sake of the mitzvah itself. Only then does that Torah have the ability to be the antidote to incapacitate the influences of the evil inclination. Therefore, that's what King Solomon says, Ner mitzvah. The mitzvah is the ner, the light, but that light is dependent on the physicality of the person. And the physicality of the person is intermeshed with the evil inclination. Torah itself is removed. It transcends that. Therefore, that light is eternal light. We find, the Talmud tells us, that a child in utero, before he's born, in the words of the Gemara, it says, Ner doduk rosho. He has a light burning above his head, and the child in utero is able to see from one end of the world to the other. There's no obstruction. And when he has this light shining on him, and he has this level of clarity, that no barriers, there's an angel who teaches him the Torah's entirety in this setting. Now, that light above his head, and due to that light, he's able to see from one end of the world to the other. No obstruction, no obstacles. That light is just abstract light. There's nothing fueling that light. What's that light? The in utero state is a semblance of the world to come. What illuminates the world to come? It's God's presence. That's emanating from God. It's not emanating from anything physical. So the unborn child, the fetus in utero, that light, that illuminator, that's the Torah or. And that light, which is unrelated to anything physical, the angel, which is spiritual, teaches that child the Torah's entirety. That's the portion which each of us received at Sinai that we're meant to study throughout our lives. That's our potential of Torah study. That's what the angel teaches the child in utero. So that's the or. That is truly the purest light, because that light provides the understanding. That's the illumination, the elucidation of truth, because you're in the world of truth before birth. The Talmud tells us in one location, Rabbi Yochanan, in Sanhedrin, that the Torah tells us at the time of the destruction of the world, right before, by the great flood, God says, Yetza Lev Ha'odom, the inclination of man's heart, is Ra min Urav. It's evil. Literal Nurav means from his youth. But Rashi cites the Midrash, Misheninar imo. From the moment the child is cast from the womb of his mother, that's where the evil inclination attaches itself to the child. In utero, there's no evil inclination. The evil inclination only comes upon the child when he's cast from his mother's womb. So there's a beautiful moral. He explains, what does that mean? When the child is in development stage, until the child is fully developed to be who he's supposed to be, the evil inclination has no permission to in any way affect that child's life or that child's potential. It's only once the child is complete, and only when he's complete, that's why the body of the mother pushes that child into existence. Only when the person is complete, ready to embark on life, that's when the evil inclination is permitted to attach itself to the person. Because now you're complete. In utero, you're still in development. You're evolving. In that stage, and what is that state? There's that level of illumination. Who's giving that? Who's providing that illumination? It's not dependent on anything specific. There's nothing material which provides that illumination, because the child at that moment is still considered a spiritual being, because the physicality only starts functioning once he leaves the body, when he functions independent of the mother in terms system-wise. That's the understanding. So Shlomo says, Ki ner mitzvah Torah or. The mitzvah is the ner. The Torah is illumination, as we just explained. V'derech chaim tochochos. And the path to life is tochochos, is to inform you, to teach you teachings which will be able to contain you and restrain you. Because when you have an understanding of what life is, you have to engage in certain behavior patterns to temper the animal that exists within every one of us. So it's derech chaim is what is tochochos. Tochochos, as Torah tells us, tochocha normally means rebuke. It's not external rebuke. When we study behavior values, behavior patterns, which are enhancing and beneficial to us, although we're physical beings. He says something very interesting, the Maral. In Hebrew, chayim is life. Chay is life. Person, chay. We find that Yosef, before he revealed himself to his brothers, and they thought he was a pagan viceroy, he swears in the life of Paro. And he says, Chay Paro. So the vow under the word Ches Yud is Atzeri, it's Chay. He doesn't say Chay Paro. What's Chay? Grammatically, Chay is always when it's associated with something else. It's called Smichus. Chay means life that's independent of anything. Something is alive. Chay Paro means you're only alive as long as your soul's in your body. The moment your soul leaves your body, so it's Chay. The life of Paro is determined by that the soul and body should be attached. The moment there's that moment of a detachment, you're no longer alive. Chay means you live. God is called Chai, because God is not dependent on anyone. Derech Chaim. Derech Chaim is Tochochas Mutzar. As he said, the intellect alone, which man is endowed with, you can't get out of that maze. It's impossible to escape from that maze. We're confounded with the earthiness of the human being. We can act responsibly as a human being, but as a spiritual being, to transcend the physicality, we don't have the capacity. That should be ner mitzvah, the Torah or, but even that's not enough. You need tochochas chaim. You need the rebuke of life. You have to be taught the school of hard knocks, so to say, to teach you what is and what's not, what's accepted, what's not accepted. Although as a human being, you may think it's sufficient, but it's not sufficient. You have to learn the regiments of life, which is tochochas chaim. Now, there's a question which is asked, firstly by the Midrash, by the commentators, which we've mentioned the question in the past. The Jews are at Sinai, and God offers the Torah to the Jewish people. What do we say? Nasa v'nishma. We accept unequivocally the Torah. Then we read a little bit further. We read the Jews are standing under the mountain, and the Talmud tells us, the Midrash tells us, that God put the mountain over the heads of the Jewish people and gave us an ultimatum. Either accept the Torah or you'll be buried under the mountain. So the question is, we already said we accept unequivocally. We were more than willing to accept. We desired it, or we're even willing to embrace it before we even know the extent of the obligation. Why is God putting a mountain over our heads? To compel us, and it gives us an ultimatum. Either you accept, or you'll be buried on the mountain, and existence will revert back to pre-existence. Why? So the Rechaim HaKodesh gives an answer. He says, very interesting. We accepted the Torah, embraced it unequivocally, the written and oral law. However, what they couldn't accept, which they didn't want to accept, was that the rabbis are endowed with the power and authorized that they could legislate fences. That the Jews said, that we're not willing to accept. Why? There's no end to it. You know, that you could actually put a person in a straitjacket where he can't move an iota. So therefore, there's no limit to what fences could be. That we're not accepting. The fences. God says, you must accept the fences. Whatever fences the rabbis legislate, you must accept those fences. And for that reason, he put a mountain over our head. And he concludes, why? Because God was communicating to tell us, being a human being, we don't always have 100% cognizance. We don't always have clarity. You must have fences. Without fences, because of the conflicts that a human being has, being a physical being, being influenced by our physicality, it's inevitable you're going to fail. And the Torah cannot survive without fences. And because the Torah cannot survive without fences, therefore they must be in place. And the body of government who have the right to legislate and promulgate those fences, those are the rabbis. They were authorized by the Torah. And you're bound by their law. Because without fences, you cannot survive. Because why? Because as much as we're spiritual beings, we have a soul which is spiritual, but we're still living within a physical environment. The influences are still physical. Unless we wean ourselves from the physicality and we distance ourselves to take every level of precaution, not to go through that minefield, not to step on the mine, that cannot be without fences. Because due to our lack of clarity, it's inevitable we're going to fail. But that's derech chaim tochochas musar. What is the path of life? That's the rebuke of musar. That's the laws which restrain us, which hold us in check that we don't cross many lines. We don't even get near the line to cross it. Once mentioned, the Maral says this later, Pirkei Avos, it says, if you consider three things, you'll never come to sin. From where you come, where are you going, and before who you will give a reckoning. From where do you come? From a putrid droplet of semen. Where are you going? To the location of worms and maggots. And before who will you stand? Before the King of Kings, God himself, to give a reckoning. The Mishnah uses a term, if you consider these three things, you will not come to the clutches of sin. So the Maral, the Frog answer should say, you will not come to sin. What are clutches of sin? Meaning like this, he explains, once you're in the clutches of sin, it's not so simple to extricate yourself, to pull yourself back. Person goes out on a limb, and you're at the end. And the limb is tottering, and you're about to fall off. To inch yourself back to the trunk of the tree, which is more secure, it's very difficult, because you're at the very end already. Or God forbid, a person allows himself to go into a brothel, and he's exposed to all the temptations. At that moment, you're in the clutches of sin. You're ready, the Satan has you in his clutches. You know what it means to wrench yourself out of there? It's nearly impossible. So if you want to keep your distance, not to go into those clutches, into the jaw of the lion, what you have to do is, to keep your distance, consider three things. From where you come, where you're going, and before who you will stand. That's the clutches. The derech chaim is tochochas musar. That musar, the teachings of Pirkei Avos, gives us the foresight to understand how to live an appropriate life, which always has us directly connected to a spiritual way. The values, the concepts, the behavior patterns are not related to our physicality. Those behavior patterns keep us a distance, do not allow that desire to seep into our lives, to take control of our lives. That's what it's about. So derech chaim, the way of life, the path of life is tochachas musar. It's only musar. Those are the fences. Mishlei, Proverbs, they're all Proverbs to teach us values, how to live our lives, to keep our heads way above water. Not that we're just pedaling and treading water, but rather we're way above the water. We're riding the wave. We're not beneath the surface. That's what it's about. I'm going to stop here. We've been discussing the past number of classes, the request of Ritzeg. God should be willing and agreeable to us, to our supplications, to restore the service to the sanctuary of the temple, accept our sacrifices, our supplications with love and with willingness. And our service should always be continuously seen as positive. It's very interesting. There's no question. The rebuilding of Jerusalem. Lushalayim be'ircha toshuv. Your divine presence should return there. Es semach dover avdecha. You should allow the coming of Mashiach. What is that all about? When you ask for healing, that's us. We ask for blessing, that's us. We'll ask for endowment of discretion, wisdom, understand, that's us. When you ask for forgiveness or to be brought back to God's service, that's God. The focus is not us for us. It's we should be where we were created to be. Bring us back. Forgive us. Reinstatement. All that reinstatement and bring us back is all within the spiritual realm. not as physical human beings. Healing is a physical human being. Blessing is physical. Reestablish of the courts. God, that has to do with godliness. The majority of the blessings of the Amida really connote that the reason why we'll make these requests is for God's sake, not for our own sake. Our own sake is for God's sake. That's where we're the ultimate beneficiaries. So could you imagine when you say, Refo'ena Hashem v'nei rafeh, heal me God and let us be healed. Come to our salvation and we should be saved. If the objective of that request, we should be healed to be able to serve you better. Only for your sake, not for us. It's not we want to be healthy, recover from illness, because we want to live high on the hog. We want to indulge to a greater degree material. That's us. But if you say, Refo'enu, we want to be healed, not because we should have less pain. We should be more functional to be able to serve you better. If that would be the mindset of a person. And the reason why we want material blessing is not for the sake of comfort, because in the state of material blessing, we're able to serve you without distraction. If that would be the intent of the person. Or the reason why you want endowment of discretion, insight, and wisdom is to be able to function as a more advanced person to serve God at a more advanced level. That means every request is spiritual. It's to function within the capacity and the context as God wants us to function. So when we say, Retzei Hashem Elokeinu b'Amcho Yisrael, God Almighty, our Almighty, you should be willing to your people Israel and their supplications. And return the service to your inner sanctums of your house, the ishes and the sacrifices. That's what we're asking. So the thrust of the Amida is not really us, if you really analyze it. It's not us. It's God's glory. Forgiveness, bring us back. Healing, you may think it's us, and it could be us for our own sake. Blessings for our own sake. But the rebuilding Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. Look, if we wouldn't have an Arab problem, and whenever you go to Jerusalem, you stay in a 5-star hotel, and you have your luxury car waiting outside, and you have the best accommodation at every level, all the amenities. What are we asking for to rebuild in Jerusalem? With a temple, without a temple. You have it all. Because that's not what we're asking. If you really are focused on what we're saying, it all has to do with us as God's people. To fully function as God's people. And we want to be restored to that level. That is the thrust of the Amida. And you can't fool yourself. Many people, they come across, if anything smacks of too religious. I don't want to be seen as a fanatic. I'm not a fanatic. What's fanaticism? Fanatic means you're doing more than you have to do. You're extreme. A person lives healthy. That's pretty extreme. Why can't you just put your face in that trough or in that feed bag and just indulge and eat anything you want? You know why? Because that's called irresponsible living. It's not responsible. And you never walk away from the table. That's not living healthy. The thrust of the Amida is, what is healthy for the Jew? To be connected to God. Outside the endowment of discretion, insight, and wisdom, and healing and blessing, every other blessing in the Amida directly openly declares it's all about our relation with God. That's what it's about. It's not us. It's him, and we want to reinstate that. Whether it's Yerushalayim, whether it's judges, whether it's God's support for the tzaddikim. And we have trust in you. The coming of Mashiach. Accepting our tefillah and our sacrifices, restoring sacrifices. What do you mean restoring sacrifice? What do we need sacrifices for? We're at a level of advanced medicine. What do we need sacrifices for? We have a level of hygiene and antibiotics that it can deal with any illness. What do we need any of this stuff for? That's not what we're talking about. We're speaking about the spiritual welfare of the Jewish people. What is the nature of our relationship? How secure is it with God? And how do we conclude? Allow our eyes to see your return to Zion with mercy. We want to be there. We desire to such a degree, we want to see it with our own eyes. We want to have that experience, that we should be touched by that sanctification of God's name, that God returns himself to Zion. But we recognize without mercy, we're not worthy. We're not worthy of that level of relationship. It's only due to Rachmin. Without Rachmin, it's not happening. It's with a yearning we're saying this. Are you some kind of fanatic? No. I wear my multicolored prayer shawl. Do you know what I paid for this? Once I met a person, I was scholar residence in Teaneck, and I meet a person, and he's wearing tchelis on his tzitzis. That's the blue dyed, number of the strings are dyed blue. And usually, a person who studies in the conventional yeshiva doesn't have that on his tzitzis. So I said to him, and this person studied in the Mir Yeshiva, and he's married, he's living in Teaneck. I said, what's this all about? Why all of a sudden are you wearing this? He says to me, you know what it cost? Even wholesale? I said, that's not the question I'm asking you, what it cost you. I'm asking why you're wearing it. Why are you wearing it? Well, he says, because he heard the name of a certain rabbi, if you don't wear it, you're going to be in violation of a positive commandment. Because that's supposed to be tchelis. So I said, it's interesting. Rav Yoshev Zechet Tzadok Levroch, at that time he was alive, the leading decider of the world, doesn't wear it. You mean to say, because he doesn't wear it, he's in violation of positive commandment, because he doesn't wear what you wear, regardless of what you paid for it? Evidently, there's something wrong here. So you mean you're wearing it because you want to do the mitzvah in the most perfect way? You don't think Rabbi Yoshev wants to do the mitzvah in that perfect way? Evidently, you have some other reason why you're wearing it. You want to identify a certain way. So the question is, why do you want to identify that way? Because, if you don't, that means you're not part of a certain group. And you're not seen as part of that. Whether it's being more Zionistic or more whatever you want to call it, progressive. Rav Chaim Kanievsky, Zechet Tzadok Levroch, said regarding Tchelis that it's hidden away till the coming of Mashiach. When Mashiach will come, only then we'll know what Tchelis is. Until then, it's not Tchelis. And there was nobody at the time that he lived that had source material like he had. And he sourced it. So again, what is it all about? We're asking, we're yearning, we should see with our own eyes your return to Zion with Rachmin. There's a story, Rav Gifter, Zechet Tzadok Levrocha, was the Yeshiva in Tells in Cleveland. He originally was born in the United States, in Virginia, and he went to Europe to study. Came back, and he was part of the faculty of the Tells Yeshiva in Cleveland, and eventually he became the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the Yeshiva. And there was a time he left Cleveland because they opened a branch in Israel, right outside of Jerusalem. It's called Tell Stone. there was a man by the name of Stone who owned American greeting cards, who purchased a very large piece of land outside of Yerushalayim, and he donated, and because he lives in Cleveland, Stone, he donated the land to the Tel Yeshiva, that they should build a community called Telstone, Kiryat Telstone. That's what it's called. So, and they built the yeshiva there, and Rav Gifter went from the United States to live. He was older ready to live in Israel. And he was one of a kind of an orator, an intellect, besides being proficient in the whole Talmud. And there was a dispute. What was the dispute? Among, in the shul, and they said, we're going to go consult with Rabbi Gifter, because he's a broad-minded person. He has an understanding. What was the dispute? You know, at the time of the 6-Day War, we reconquered, we captured what was rightfully ours, East Jerusalem, the Kosel. So they declared it as what? Yom Yerushalayim, the day of Yerushalayim, the reunification of Yerushalayim. So the question was, does one say Hallel on Yom Yerushalayim? We're not talking about in the Israeli Independence Day. Yom Yerushalayim has nothing to do with Zionism. It has to do with we reunified Yerushalayim. Does one say Hallel? And these two groups, they prayed in one synagogue, and it was a contentious issue, and it was going to destroy the shul. Some said yes, some said no, and so they figured we'll go to Rabbi Gifter. He'll explain why yes, why not. So they go. So Rabbi Gifter asked him a question. He says, I want to ask you a question. When you say Hallel on Pesach, which is to commemorate giving thanks for the holiday of our freedom, Zman Cheruseinu, or on Shavuos, Zman Matan Toraseinu, the time that God gave us the Torah. When you say Hallel then, do you say it with more enthusiasm than Yom Yerushalayim, or with less enthusiasm? That's the question I asked them. So they said, we say it with less enthusiasm than Yerushalayim. So he says, you don't realize, if that's the case, this argument between you has nothing to do, are you supposed to say Hallel or not say Hallel? This is your egos. Because how could you be more enthusiastic about Yom Yerushalayim than when we regained our freedom and to go towards Sinai to receive the Torah, God's Torah, be God's chosen people? How could that be less enthusiastic and less exciting? The answer is everybody has his own understanding. Everybody has their own axe to grind. It's all personal egos. That's all it is. It has nothing to do with the issue. When he brought this point out, you know what happened? There was no Hallel on Yom Yerushalayim. Because if you could say it with more enthusiasm, you're not saying it to thank God for Yerushalayim, but rather you're doing it to stroke your own ego, and you were able to achieve something that the other one didn't want to accept, didn't want to embrace. When will Yerushalayim regain its special status? Well, we'll see with our own eyes. When you return to Zion with mercy, we're not there yet. If you ever see any of the films of the 6-Day War, and when they regained the Kosel, the Western Wall, and the soldiers, you know, they were fighting a number of, even though it was a very quick victory, and they had the most casualties regaining the old city because they had to fight in alleyways, narrow streets, and you saw those soldiers there crying at the Kosel. So Rabbi Goren, who was the chief chaplain of the Israeli army, of the IDF, he stood at a high location and he blew the shofar to be a semblance of the coming of Mashiach. Because when Mashiach comes, there's going to be a blast of the shofar, and the whole world's going to hear the blast of the shofar. As at Sinai, the shofar blast continued unceasingly and only got stronger. That was supposed to be symbolic of that's what's going to be. The reunification of Yerushalayim is an indication we're in the entering into the area of the blossoming, the sprouting of the coming of Mashiach. That's what it is. This was a long time ago. The 6-Day War. It's been years ago. Still hasn't happened, but it will happen. We still have to yearn no less than we've always yearned for the coming Mashiach. That, because only with that will God's glory be restored. And we want to see with our own eyes, we should be witness to that when you return to Zion, only with Rachmim, and we recognize that. We're ourselves, we're not sufficiently worthy. We have to recognize who we're not, and if we recognize who we are not, we'll address who we should be. And as a result of that, that will give us merit that God should return to Zion. That's the closing bracha before we give thanks to God for all that he's done for us. We have a few moments to begin the modim. The closing part of the Amidah is we give thanks to God. I had mentioned the Rambam, Maimonides' position is that tefillah is a doraisa, is a Torah obligation. And tefillah is comprised of 3 parts. The opening blessings, where you're acknowledging who God is, which is 3 blessings. Then we have the supplications. And then we conclude with modim, thanks. Give thanks to God. You would say, what is avodas halev? What's the service of the heart? It's recognize who God is. So you would say, if you say, Elokei Avram Elokei Yitzchak Elokei Yaakov, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, great, powerful, awesome, sustains life with chesed, resurrects the dead. You are holy, your name's holy, and those who praise you are holy. Okay? So it's an acknowledgement who God is. Despite people would believe to say, it's us, it's not him. And then we make the requests, and then we give thanks. Rambam says that if a person doesn't make the supplications of request, one does not fulfill his obligation of tefillah, of the service of the heart on a Torah level. You must ask. Why ask? Just let's say the opening and the closing. God, I acknowledge who you are. 1, 2, 3, we close it. Bring peace upon Israel. We thank you for all you've done for us. How do we not ask? Why do you have to ask? Could you imagine a person's worth $1 billion and they're giving out food? There's a food pantry, quality food. Would a man worth $1 billion go accept food from a food pantry? It's a disgrace. Thank God I have enough. If I wouldn't have is one thing, but I have more than enough. I could even help others. Person's healthy, he's wealthy, and he's wise. He has everything. What do I have to ask? I have blessing, I have health. I don't need healing. Thank God I'm not sick. You have to request. Why do you have to make these requests? Because you say God sustains life with chesed. He somech noflim brofi cholim. He supports the fallen. He heals the sick. If you really believe that's reality, how do you not supplicate him in all those areas of supplication? And if you don't, that means it's only lip service. You're not sincere with what you're saying. You know, a bank who gives out money on loan with no due date to pay the debt, interest-free. You tell me who's not lining up to take that money. The only reason why you're not going to that bank because you can't believe it's true. It's reality. But if you believed it was reality, you're there to take the money. If you would understand that health and wealth, things could change in a nanosecond. We speak about the wheel of fortune. You could be on top with one turn. You're on top, all of a sudden you're on the bottom. To recognize that. So therefore you have to supplicate. Despite where you are, you have to understand it's a continuous endowment of God. Whatever you have, it continues. So we give thanks. We give thanks to God for all that he's done to express our appreciation. And we even speak about miracles that he provides continuously for us. Wonders. But if you want to give thanks, what should be the first thing we should give thanks for? What's most important? What's most important? On the festivals, what do we say? Ato v'chartonim mikol ha'amim. You've chosen us from all the nations. You know what that means? The creator of the world took us physical beings and he chose us to be his holy people, to be his only son, to be his princely, kingly nation. You know what that is? Could you imagine, again, if the presidency would be at a certain level and the president would be a true statesman and being a member of the cabinet would really be something to pride yourself in, and you'd be chosen to be a member of that cabinet, what level of how privileged would you feel? It's the ultimate privilege. God took us to be his people. God, the infinite being, took us finite, fickle peons to be his people. It's not to be believed, not to be understood. We should be overtaxed to a level that we can't even express our appreciation for this. So why do we give thanks to God first and foremost? First and foremost, we give thanks that you're our God. When we began that meeting, what did we say? Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avoseinu. That's the opening. You're our God and the God of our forefathers. What's our God? Our God means the Almighty. Elokeinu is our Almighty. The Almighty there's a personalization. That's the first thank you. Atohu Hashem Elokeinu. Ve'Elokei Avoseinu. La'olam vo'ed. It's not a temporary situation. It's permanent. Forever. You're our God, Almighty, the Almighty of our forefathers, forever. This relationship will never be terminated. And God guaranteed it. So how thankful should you be for that? Now, somebody says, you're a financial person. And they said, I'm going to give you an hour of Warren Buffett's time, and he will advise you how to invest. An hour. Person's ecstatic. When he's able to call in that hour, even with a small amount of money, he could have a phenomenal return on the little bit he has. Person, so will allow you to move into Warren Buffett's house. He will advise you continuously as long as you're alive. This is too much already. Hashem Elokeinu Olam Vo'ed, forever. God says, I am yours forever. You are my chosen people forever. Never to be terminated. We can't even appreciate what that means. But even at the very superficial level that we appreciate what that means, that thankfulness has to be at a level which cannot be contained.